I pressed my palms flat against the kitchen counter, willing them to stop shaking. Through the doorway, I could hear my nephew and his wife laughing in what used to be my reading room. Their voices carried that particular quality of people who believe they've already won. "She'll agree," my nephew's wife said. Her voice had that bright, certain tone I'd come to dread. "She has nowhere else to go." I closed my eyes. The porcelain of the counter felt cold beneath my hands, anchoring me. I had raised that boy, raised him from the time he was 6 years old, after my sister died in a car accident. His father, my brother-in-law, had vanished within a year. Couldn't handle the grief, so it had been just the two of us, in this house my late husband had left me for 22 years. And now, at 73 years old, I was being told to move into the storage room. The conversation from earlier that evening still rang in my ears. My nephew had stood in this very kitchen, his wife beside him with her hand on her pregnant belly like a shield, and he'd said the words I never imagined hearing. "Aunt Gisella, we need to talk about the living arrangements." I'd set down my teacup slowly. "Living arrangements? With the baby coming, we need the master bedroom. It gets the best light, and it's closest to the nursery." His wife had smiled at me, that smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We've decided you should move to the room off the garage. It's cozy." The storage room, 8 feet by 10 feet, one small window that looked out onto the trash bins. "That's not a bedroom," I'd said, quietly. "Well, it has space for a bed." My nephew had shifted his weight, not quite meeting my eyes. "Look, Aunt Gisella, you're getting older. You don't need much space. And honestly, if you're not comfortable with it, there are very nice assisted living facilities. This is my house." The words had come out sharper than I'd intended. My nephew's wife had straightened, her smile turning hard. "Actually, we've been meaning to discuss that too. You're 73. Living alone isn't safe. You could fall, you could forget the stove on. It would be irresponsible of us not to be here." She'd glanced at my nephew. "We're family. We're looking out for you." I had stared at her. 28 years old. I'd met her exactly 4 times before my nephew announced they were married 3 months ago. She'd moved into my house 2 weeks after that. "I've lived in this house for 41 years, I'd said. "Exactly." My nephew had finally looked at me then. "You've had your time here, but things change. We're starting a family. We need space. And you." He'd paused, and I'd seen something in his face I didn't recognize. "You're just one person. You don't need 3 bedrooms, a reading room, a garden. It's selfish, really, holding on to all this space." I hadn't trusted myself to speak after that. I'd simply walked away, came into this kitchen, and stood here at the counter while they returned to their conversation in my reading room, discussing paint colors for the nursery. That had been 3 hours ago. Now, I opened my eyes and looked around the kitchen. The morning light would come through that window in a few hours. I'd stood in this spot for thousands of mornings, making breakfast for a little boy who'd called me Aunt Gigi and hugged my waist, who'd cried on my shoulder when he missed his mother, who'd graduated high school and told me I was the only mother he'd ever really known. That boy was gone. In his place was a man who looked at me like an inconvenience. I straightened slowly. My hands had stopped shaking. Through the doorway, I heard my nephew's wife laugh again. "We can turn her reading room into a walk-in closet. God knows I need one." Something settled in my chest then. A decision, though I hadn't consciously made it yet. It sat there, solid and certain, and I recognized it for what it was. I was not moving into the storage room. I walked quietly to my bedroom, the master bedroom they wanted, and closed the door. The room was dark, except for the streetlight glow through the curtains. I sat on the edge of my bed and allowed myself 1 minute of grief. Just one. For the boy I'd raised, for the years I'd given, for the belief I'd held that love and sacrifice meant something. Then the minute was over, and I reached for my phone. I had a lawyer, a good one. I'd made my will years ago, when my husband died, and I'd updated it after I took in my nephew. Everything, the house, my savings, my late husband's life insurance, All of it was set to go to my nephew, because he was the only family I had left. Because I loved him. My lawyer's emergency line went to voicemail. I left a message, keeping my voice steady and low. "Henry, it's Gisella Hartwell. I need to make changes to my will. Immediately. Please call me first thing tomorrow morning." I hung up and sat in the darkness for a long moment. Then I opened my laptop. The search history was easy to clear. I looked up the fair market value of my house, 3-bedroom, 2-bath, in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. The housing market was strong. My house, which I'd bought with my husband for $78,000 in 1984, was now worth $745,000. I looked at apartments next. 1-bedroom, safe neighborhoods, reasonable rent. I bookmarked 3. Then I looked at something else. Something I'd been dreaming about for years but had never seriously considered, because I'd always thought I'd grow old in this house, with family around me, maybe playing with my nephew's children in the garden I'd tended for 40 years. I looked at travel, extended stays, senior-friendly tours. There was a 6-month program in Italy, Tuscany, a villa rental with other women my age, cooking classes, day trips to Florence and Rome. The cost was substantial, but with the sale of my house, I could afford it. I could afford that and the 1-bedroom apartment and still have more than half my money left to live on. I bookmarked the site. My nephew and his wife were still awake when I finally turned off my light. I could hear them moving around, hear the sound of furniture being dragged across the floor in the reading room, planning their walk-in closet, probably. I lay in the dark and thought about my husband, Thomas. What would he say if he could see this? He'd loved my nephew too, had been the one to suggest we take him in after my sister died. "He's lost his mother," Thomas had said. "We can't let him lose everything." But Thomas was gone. Heart attack at 61, quick and brutal, and I'd been alone for 12 years now. I'd poured all that love, all that energy that had nowhere else to go, into raising his nephew, our nephew. I hadn't done a perfect job. I knew that. I'd been grieving too, learning to be a single parent at 51, but I'd done my best. I'd gone to every parent-teacher conference, every basketball game. I'd helped with college applications, co-signed his first apartment lease, given him money when he was broke. When he'd asked to move back in 6 months ago because he and his new wife were saving for a house, I'd said yes without hesitation. I hadn't known I was giving him ideas. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay in the dark and made plans. Real plans, detailed plans. By the time morning light began to gray the windows, I knew exactly what I was going to do. I heard my nephew's wife in the shower at 7:30. My nephew left for work at 8, the same time he always did. He didn't knock on my door or say goodbye. I listened to his car pull out of the driveway from where I sat on the edge of my bed, still in my nightgown, hands folded in my lap. His wife would be in the house alone with me until this afternoon. She worked from home, some kind of social media consulting. I'd seen her at the dining room table with her laptop, taking photos of herself with ring lights and talking to her phone. I got dressed slowly. A nice blouse, slacks, the pearl earrings Thomas had given me for our 20th anniversary. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw a woman who was tired but not defeated. Not anymore. My lawyer called at 9. "Gisella, I got your message. What's going on?" I told him. Calmly, clearly, the facts only. When I finished, there was a long pause. "I see," Henry finally said. "And you want to change the primary beneficiary?" "Yes. I'd like to leave the bulk of my estate to the women's shelter downtown. The one my sister used to volunteer at. They do good work." Another pause. "That's a significant change. I'm aware. Your nephew would likely contest. Let him try." My voice was steady. "I'm of sound mind. I have documentation of my expenses, my bank statements, everything to prove I'm competent. And Henry, I want to do this today." Today? I'm 73 years old. I don't know how many todays I have left. I'd like to use this one to make sure my wishes are clear. Henry was quiet for a moment. Then I heard papers rustling. I can have the documents ready by this afternoon. 2 o'clock? Perfect. I hung up and looked at my phone. My hands weren't shaking anymore. I spent the morning being methodical. I went through my closet and sorted my clothes into 3 piles: keep, donate, trash. The keep pile was small. I didn't need much. I'd learned that, living through my husband's death, raising a child, things didn't matter. People did. And when people showed you who they were, you should believe them. At 11, I called a real estate agent. Not the one who'd sold me and Thomas this house. She'd retired years ago. A new one, young and hungry, whose number I'd found online. I want to sell my house, I told her, quickly and quietly. What do I need to do? She asked questions. I answered them. By the time we hung up, she was coming by tomorrow morning to assess the property and discuss listing options. At 1, my nephew's wife finally emerged from the reading room. I heard her in the kitchen, heard the coffee maker start. I waited until she had her cup, then I walked out of my bedroom. She looked up, startled. I rarely left my room when she was home. I'd learned it was easier that way. Oh, Aunt Gisella, I thought you were napping. She smiled that bright smile. I was going to make lunch. Are you hungry? I looked at her. Really looked at her. She was young, pretty, confident in a way that suggested she'd never been told no in her entire life. The kind of person who saw what she wanted and reached for it, assuming it was hers by right. I have an appointment this afternoon, I said. I'll be out for a few hours. Oh? She sipped her coffee. Doctor's appointment? Personal business. Right. She glanced toward the reading room. Well, while you're gone, I was thinking I might start clearing out some of the books in there. I mean, you've probably read them all anyway, right? We can donate them or don't touch my books. The words came out harder than I'd intended. She blinked. I'm sorry? Those are my books. In my reading room. In my house. Don't touch them. She set down her coffee cup slowly. Aunt Gisella, I think we need to have a conversation about boundaries. This is going to be a shared space now. And, no, I said quietly, it's not. I left her standing there and walked out the front door. Henry's office was downtown, a 20-minute drive. I'd been there twice before, once to make my will after Thomas died, once to update it after I took in my nephew. The receptionist recognized me and smiled warmly. Mrs. Hartwell, it's good to see you. Henry's ready for you. The paperwork took less than an hour. Henry walked me through every change, made sure I understood what I was doing. The bulk of my estate, including the proceeds from the sale of the house, would go to the women's shelter. I left my nephew $5,000 and a letter explaining that I hoped he'd use it to learn the value of what he'd had and thrown away. What about your personal effects? Henry asked. Jewelry, photos, things like that? I thought about the pearls I was wearing, Thomas's watch that I kept in my nightstand drawer, the photo albums from my nephew's childhood. The jewelry can be sold and the proceeds added to the shelter donation. The photo albums. I paused. He can have those. If he wants them, he might not. Henry looked at me over his glasses. Gisella, are you sure about this? I've never been more sure of anything. I signed the documents. Henry notarized them. He made copies and put the originals in his safe. If anything happens, he said, if you need anything, you call me. Day or night. I will. Thank you, Henry. I drove home slowly, taking the long way. It was a beautiful day, early October, the leaves just starting to turn. I'd lived in this city my entire life. Grew up here, went to school here, married here, buried my husband here, raised a boy here, but I wasn't tied to it anymore. That was the thought that kept circling through my mind. I wasn't tied to anything anymore. When I got home, my nephew's car was in the driveway. He'd come home early. I found him and his wife in the kitchen, and from the looks on their faces, she'd told him about our conversation. Aunt Gisella, we need to talk. My nephew's voice was tight. My wife says you were rude to her today. I asked her not to touch my books. See? His wife gestured at me. She's being territorial about everything. This is exactly what I was talking about. My nephew sighed. Look, Aunt Gisella, I get that change is hard, but you're going to have to accept that things are different now. We're a family. No, I said quietly. We're not. They both stared at me. What? My nephew said. We're not a family. A family doesn't tell a 73-year-old woman to move into a storage room. A family doesn't talk about turning her reading room into a closet. A family doesn't treat someone who raised them like an inconvenience. I never said you were an inconvenience. You didn't have to say it. I set my purse down on the counter, but you're right about one thing. Things are different now. I'm selling the house. Silence. You're… what? My nephew's face had gone pale. I'm selling the house. I've already contacted a real estate agent. She's coming tomorrow morning. You can't do that. It's my house. I can do whatever I want with it. His wife stepped forward. You're being irrational. You're upset because we asked for one reasonable accommodation. Get out. They both froze. I'm sorry. My nephew's voice was barely above a whisper. Get out of my house. Both of you. I want you gone by the end of the week. You can't just throw us out. We live here. You live here because I allowed it. I'm no longer allowing it. You have 1 week to find somewhere else to live. My nephew's wife grabbed his arm. She can't do this. There are laws, tenant rights. I never charged you rent, I said. You're not tenants, you're guests, and I'm asking you to leave. My nephew was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. Aunt Gisella, please. We don't have anywhere else to go. You should have thought of that before you decided I didn't need space in my own home. I didn't mean, he stopped, swallowed. I was just trying to plan for the baby. I didn't think… No, I agreed. You didn't think. You didn't think about how it would feel to be told I was selfish for living in my own house. You didn't think about how it would feel to hear you discuss my age like it was a disease. You didn't think about me at all. He opened his mouth, closed it. His wife was looking between us, her face red. This is insane, she said. You're a crazy old woman, and that's enough. My nephew's voice was sharp. He looked at her, then at me. We'll go. We'll be out by the weekend. I nodded. I'd appreciate that. I walked to my bedroom and closed the door. My heart was pounding, but my hands were still steady. Behind me, I could hear raised voices, my nephew and his wife arguing. I didn't try to listen. It didn't matter anymore. I sat on my bed and called the number for the villa program in Tuscany. A woman answered, her voice warm with an accent I couldn't quite place. Bella Vita Villas, this is Sophia. Hello. My name is Gisella Hartwell. I'm calling about the 6-month program, the one that starts in November. Ah, yes. Do you have questions? Just one. Do you have space for one more? There was a pause, the sound of computer keys clicking. Actually, we just had a cancellation yesterday. So yes, we have 1 spot left. I closed my eyes. I'd like to take it. Wonderful. Let me get your information. The rest of that week passed in a strange, suspended way. My nephew and his wife barely spoke to me. They packed in silence, moving boxes out to a U-Haul they'd rented. I stayed in my room mostly, or took long walks around the neighborhood, saying goodbye to the streets I'd known for 40 years. On Friday evening, my nephew knocked on my door. His wife was already in the car. I could see her through the window, arms crossed, staring straight ahead. We're leaving now, he said. I stood in the doorway and looked at him. He was 28 years old. He had his mother's eyes, my sister's eyes, and for a moment I saw him as he'd been at 6, small and scared and hurting. But that boy was gone. I hope you find what you're looking for, I said. He shifted his weight. Aunt Gisella, I'm sorry for what I said. I didn't mean to hurt you. Yes, you did. You just didn't think I'd have the spine to do anything about it. He flinched. That's not fair, isn't it? We stood there for a long moment. Then he nodded and walked away. I watched from the window as the U-Haul pulled out of the driveway. His wife didn't look back. My nephew did, just once. I wondered if he'd realize what he'd lost. Probably not today. Maybe not ever. But it wasn't my job to teach him anymore. The real estate agent came back the next morning. The house was clean, emptier, without my nephew's and his wife's belongings cluttering the space. She walked through slowly, taking photos, making notes. "It's a beautiful house," she said. "Great bones. The garden is stunning. Thank you. My husband planted most of it. With this market, I think we can list it high. You should get multiple offers." "I don't need multiple offers. I need a quick sale." She looked at me carefully. "I can do quick, but it might mean accepting less than market value. That's fine. I don't need the money. I need the freedom." She smiled then, a real smile. "I understand. I'll have it listed by Monday." The house sold in 4 days. A young couple, expecting their first child. They walked through with wide eyes, talking excitedly about nurseries and gardens and family dinners. They had no idea why I was selling, and I didn't tell them. I just smiled and told them I hoped they'd be happy here. "We will be," the wife said. "This is our dream house." I signed the papers in Henry's office. The young couple signed across from me. When it was done, Henry shook my hand. "Where will you go?" he asked. "Italy. For 6 months. After that," I paused. "I don't know yet, and that's okay." I spent my last night in the house in my reading room, surrounded by boxes of books that would go into storage until I figured out what to do with them. I'd kept the photo albums out, left them on the dining room table where my nephew could find them if he ever came back. If he wanted them, I didn't sleep much. I walked through the empty rooms, remembering Thomas making breakfast in that kitchen, my nephew doing homework at the dining room table, Christmas mornings, birthday parties, regular, boring, beautiful days that I'd thought would last forever. But nothing lasts forever. And that was okay too. The moving truck came at 8. They loaded my few boxes of personal belongings, the furniture I was keeping. By noon, the house was empty, except for the items I was leaving for the new owners. I took one last walk through the garden. The roses Thomas had planted were still blooming, defiant against the October chill. I'd showed the new owners how to care for them. They'd promised they would. I stood there in the afternoon sun, surrounded by flowers and memories, and I waited for grief to hit me, for regret, for fear. But all I felt was light. My taxi pulled up at 2. The driver helped me load my suitcases. As we pulled away from the curb, I looked back once. The house sat there, familiar and strange, already belonging to someone else. I didn't cry. The apartment I'd rented was small but bright, with large windows and a view of the park. I'd signed a month-to-month lease, just until my flight to Italy in 3 weeks. I spent those weeks learning how to live a different kind of life. I went to museums I'd always meant to visit. I took myself to dinner at restaurants where I'd never felt comfortable going alone. I sat in the park with a book and watched people pass by, and I realized that for the first time in decades, I had nothing I had to do. No one depending on me. No obligations beyond the ones I chose. It was terrifying. It was liberating. My nephew called once, 2 weeks before my flight. I almost didn't answer. "Aunt Gisella?" His voice was small. "I heard you sold the house." "I did. Where are you living?" "That's not your concern anymore." A pause. "I want to apologize. Really apologize. I was wrong. I was selfish. We were stressed about the baby and the money, and I wasn't thinking." "I know you weren't thinking. But that doesn't undo what was done. Is there any way we could we meet? Talk?" I looked out the window of my apartment at the park below, at the life I was building. "No," I said gently. "I don't think so. Aunt Gisella, please. You're the only family I have. You should have remembered that when it mattered." I hung up. He didn't call back. On the morning of my flight, I woke up before dawn. I made coffee in my tiny apartment kitchen and watched the sun rise over the park. In a few hours, I'd be on a plane to Italy, to Tuscany, to a villa full of women I'd never met, a language I barely spoke, a life I couldn't quite imagine. I was 73 years old. I was starting over, and I couldn't wait. As the taxi drove me to the airport, I thought about my nephew one last time. I hoped he'd learn from this. I hoped he'd be a better father than he'd been a nephew. I hoped his child would grow up knowing love and respect, and that family meant more than convenience. But those were his lessons to learn now, not mine to teach. The plane lifted off at noon. I pressed my face to the window and watched the city shrink below me, watched my whole life get smaller and smaller until it was just a pattern of streets and buildings, indistinguishable from any other. The woman next to me smiled. "First time to Italy?" "Yes," I said. "First time in a lot of things." She laughed. "Well, you're in for a treat. There's something magical about Italy. It changes you." I smiled back. "I'm counting on it." As we rose above the clouds into brilliant blue sky, I closed my eyes and allowed myself to feel what I'd been holding back for weeks. Not sadness, not regret, not fear, just freedom. Pure, weightless, impossible freedom. And underneath that, something I hadn't felt in a very long time. Excitement, hope, the wild, terrifying joy of not knowing what comes next and being okay with that. Being more than okay with that. Being thrilled. I was 73 years old, and my life was finally my own again. The adventure was just beginning.